All right, so we are going to start looking at chapter 29. This is going to be the search for order in an era of limits. All right, in this chapter, we're going to see the end of Richard Nixon. We're going to sort of touch on Ford a little bit, meet Jimmy Carter. We're also going to see some economic problems, some international issues, as well as a continuation of the women's movements and a continuation of the social revolutions of the 60s. This is going to prepare us for the pendulum shift that we'll see at the end of this chapter and the beginning of chapter 30. All right, so first, let's get to know some of the international situations. First, we're going to have OPEC. And so this was an organization of the petroleum exporting countries. Member countries included Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq. This was formed in the 1960s to serve as a profit-sharing agreement regarding the sale of oil from the Persian Gulf nations. By the 1970s, we are very dependent on oil imports, so they have a very strong hold over us. So in the 1960s and 70s, when we begin having some conflicts in the Middle East, this is going to come to kind of hurt us. So between 67 and 73, there's going to be different conflicts that are going to come up between Israel and all of its neighbors. One of them is going to result in the 1973 Yom Kippur War. This doesn't last a long time, but it does last a while. It's between Egypt and Syria. They're going to invade Israel. We're going to support Israel. Israel's going to win. In retaliation for this, OPEC declares an oil embargo against us, which means we aren't getting oil anymore. And what little bit we get, we are paying very large amounts for. So to counter this, Congress is going to create a speed limit. What? Yes, we finally have the speed limit now in the 70s. Certain cars are going to drop in sales because they just guzzle gas. And the production of small cars and sales of small cars is going to increase because everybody wants something that's going to be a little bit more gas resilient. We're also going to get an environmental movement. So the Environmental Protection Agency is going to pass Congress. It's going to be signed into law by this guy named Richard Nixon, who's a Republican. So a Republican signed into law in 1972 the Environmental Protection Agency. He's also going to institute the Clean Air Act, Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Water Pollution Control Act, Endangered Species Act. A lot of things are going to come out of the EPA. Some of this is fueled by the publication of Rachel Carson's book, The Silent Spring, which shares the impact of DDT on the food chain. So the idea is that we're spraying our food with pesticides, which is then leaching into the soil and the water systems, which is then impacting the animals that is consuming the water and things that grow from that water, and then is reaching us and causing us some problems. So everybody's in an uproar, and we are going to be very anti-DDT from this point until really even today. All right, and then we're going to have nuclear power. So since we have an oil embargo, we're trying to find alternative energies. Nuclear power, we had the bomb in World War II. We found other ways to harness this nuclear power for energy. It was viewed as an alternative to coal and oil. And environmentalists were cautious of this because they said, if there were to be a meltdown to occur within the nuclear plant, there would be radioactive waste. So in America, we do see a mild meltdown at 3 Mile Island in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in 1979. It's going to leave 100,000 people fleeing their homes. It is only a partial meltdown of the reactor. And it really later is found out to be a result from inadequate training at the people who worked inside of the facility. So there was very little radiological material released, but the impact of this was huge because we eliminated all nuclear power from our country and we no longer back it. All right, so economically, we are going to have this thing called deindustrialization, which is essentially the decline in industrial activity in a region. So Lots of factories are going to start shutting down. We are then going to have a decline in the standard of living. Incomes are going to fall. And no president, not Nixon, not Ford, and not Carter, really combat the problem. So it's going to lead to a huge economic issue. And the steel industry is actually going to be one of the industries that takes it the hardest. And we shut down several of their plants, and they never really come back from this. So this is where Detroit takes a big hit, Pittsburgh takes a big hit, places like that. So organized labor is also going to take a decline, because if factories and industry are the ones taking the biggest hits, that's usually where the blue collar workers are organized into unions. Union is going to decrease. The number of strikes, though they try to increase, really leads to nothing happening, and memberships fall. So we're taking a hit in the labor union department here. So the urban crisis, let's look at it again. The idea is that the middle class are fleeing out of the cities, right? So white flight, remember white flight, definitely have this in your notes. Cities are facing these hardships. New York is a prime example, okay? So the federal government's going to loan money to these cities. Banks are going to provide 3-year moratoriums on cities' debts, because if the higher income people are leaving the cities, then that results in lower income people staying in the cities, which means the cities now have less income. So this is going to be a pretty big deal. So with that, we're going to have a tax revolt. This is a dramatic reversal of the post-war spirit where, yeah, let's pay taxes. Let's just be all about the public investments. Let's really get in there. And we're going to completely shift that, and we're not going to like taxes. So real estate prices and property taxes are going to increase. This is going to lead to a bunch of unhappy people. So an example of this is Proposition 13 in California, which basically rolls back the property taxes that were just increased. It caps future increases and requires a 2/3 majority for all tax measures. We do have something similar to this still in Colorado called the Tabor Amendment. So you should look into that. All right. Here we go. So the 70s is considered the Watergate babies. Okay. So what this is the people born during this era are when Nixon leaves office and President Ford pardons him. So there is precedent for somebody being pardoned without ever formal charges being filed against them, because we never did file charges against Nixon, but Ford just pardoned him for any wrongdoings while he was in office. So continuity through time, connect that to current day. 1974 midterm elections are going to bring in new Democrats to Congress, all under 45 years old. Okay, this is going to reduce the number of votes needed for a filibuster. We're now going to have an Ethics in Government Act. All right. We're going to really go after what are our government officials doing, what are candidates doing, because of Watergate. So we're going to make government transparent, all right? But then the result of that is that we are less efficient, which leads to the Congress that we have today that does nothing. And we'll probably stay that way for quite some time. We're going to have a political realignment here. So conservatism is going to gain popularity. There's going to be a political power shift down to the South and then over to the West. States with strong unions are going to actually lose power because of the deindustrialization. And California, Arizona, Florida, and Texas are going to gain power within the political world. All states that still hold said political power in our country today. So let's meet Jimmy Carter. He's an outsider. He is a former governor of Georgia. He is a peanut farmer. He's just an all-around nice guy. He pledges to restore morality to the White House. He does win 50% of the popular vote. He also came in and did not really work well with Congress. So he relied a lot on inexperienced advisors. He did not manage the economic problems that came around. And then there was an Iranian revolution, which resulted again in more increase in gas prices. And this plummets Carter's approval rating. So he just has struggle after struggle after struggle. And yes, we voted for an outsider, but then we decided, you know what, we need somebody that actually knows something about Washington, because this guy's not doing what he needs to. All right, so let's look at affirmative action, something still controversial today. The overall idea was that let's account for the historical actions that have disadvantaged certain minority groups in our country. Affirmative action would combat that, except that white people feel that it unfairly created a disadvantage for them. So in 1978, we have Alan Bakke. He is going to sue the University of California Davis Medical School for rejecting him in favor of less qualified minority candidates. Side note, he was a non-traditional student, which means that he was older and his grades were not awesome. But he is going to win the case. Supreme Court is going to rule in Bakke's favor, indicating that there needs to be a more flexible affirmative action program. California voters are going to pass Proposition 209 in 1996, and they are going to prohibit public institutions such as colleges from using affirmative action to increase diversity in employment. So this is still controversial today. We're going to have protests over it, obviously. All right, so let's go back to the women's movement and gay rights. Women's activism. So women run childcare centers and feminist art and poetry movements increase. Women are going to challenge admission policies to male colleges such as Yale and Columbia. Yes, ladies, Yale and Columbia were all male institutes until the 70s. So the study of women's history is actually going to be founded here. And there's going to be an anti-rape movement that is going to spread across college campuses. So any college campus that you go to even today will have a Take Back the Night event every year, except maybe during a pandemic, maybe not then. All right, then we're going to have the Equal Rights Amendment. Remember, this was introduced in 1923 by Alice Paul. All right, Phyllis Schlafly. We talked about her in class. She is a lawyer and a conservative activist, and she fights hard against the ERA. Okay. She says that it would create an unnatural unisex society. As of right now, today, it is short by one state to being ratified as an amendment. All right, so let's keep looking at this. Roe versus Wade is going to happen. Okay, activists are going to pursue legislative and judicial gain for abortion rights. In 1973, there's going to be a ruling struck down at a Texas law that prohibited abortion for any reason. And what's going to come out of this is that within the first trimester, abortions were legal due to a woman's right to privacy. So this is polarizing, obviously, today. It transformed from a 1970s medical issue between a woman and her doctor into now a very polarizing political issue between one party and the other party. So we're going to move over to Harvey Milk. Harvey Milk is a gay rights advocate. He lives in San Francisco. He is going to run for city supervisor, which is essentially similar to our city council. So he's going to fight against the anti-gay movements that are going on. He's going to lose twice and then finally win in 1977. So he's going to help win passage of the gay rights ordinance in San Francisco. And then he's going to be assassinated in 1978 along with the city's mayor, George Moscone, by a disgruntled former supervisor, Dan White. White served 5 years of a 7-year prison sentence. And then less than 2 years after his release, he does ultimately commit suicide. The issue over why this assassination happened was over a drug rehab bill that they were considering for the city. Okay, so the Warren Court, right, part of the Miranda rights, part of Brown v. Board and Roe v. Wade is going to shift because we're going to get a new Chief Justice, and that's going to be Berger. Remember Nixon's promise to the Sun Belt states is law and order and conservative action for the Supreme Court. So he's going to nominate 4 justices, including Berger. Very conservative. So believing that the court is going to scale back on all of these liberal rulings, it does not. Because again, always remember the court works with a constitution, not a political ideology, or at least it should. They're going to remain pretty centrist on certain things. In 1986, the court does rule that sexual harassment violates the Civil Rights Act, which is kind of big. All right. We're now going to acknowledge that sexual harassment kind of happens. But there is going to be a conservative bend. In 1986, the court is going to uphold a Georgia sodomy statute that criminalized same-sex acts. This ruling is going to stand, so take note, 1986 until 2003, when there's going to be a case, Lawrence v. Texas, that recognizes the right to sexual privacy. So, okay, so let's look at families, working families during this age. A lot of women entering back into the workforce, large numbers. The divorce rates are doubling. Workers are in the national spotlight. The struggles of the working class is everywhere. And TV shows are even picking up on this, actually. So they're picking up the struggles of working class families for shows. They have shows with minorities as the leads. They have shows about single moms, all very cutting edge during this time. And then a lot of the music coming out of this time period is going to highlight the struggles of the hard work, working class. So thank goodness, because then we get Bruce Springsteen. All right, so a lot of the sexual revolution of the 60s is going to still be with us in the 70s, and it's really going to hit big in the popular culture world. So 1970s pop culture really maintains that whole sexual revolution idea. You can look at shows like Charlie's Angels, right? Three scantily clad ladies who solve crimes at the behest of a man on a speaker. And then we have The Love Boat, an entire cruise ship bent on finding love, romances, and connections for people. So we're also going to have The Pill, which is widely available now. So basically, books, films, and television are really going to explore these casual relationships. So middle-class marriage is going to get a little bit of a rebirth fused to them. There's going to be therapy. So we're going to get marriage therapy as a huge study and focus. And a lot of couples are going to start going to therapy to try to counter that large increase in the divorce rate. Okay, so if we have Roe versus Wade, we have all of this desegregation, we have sexiness all over the TV and music and in movies and books. We are definitely going to have a swing in the opposite direction, and that's going to be the evangelical resurgence. All right, so this is the fourth Great Awakening, and what's going to happen is we're going to look back at literal interpretation of the Bible. Again, we're going to see Reverend Billy Graham. He's going to come back from the 40s, and he's going to really be pushing this. And the whole purpose is they're looking at the current times of the 70s as just an absolute moral decay of society. They do not like feminism. They don't like the counterculture, this idea of sexual freedom, the freeness of homosexuality, right? Remember, Playboy's out there, so pornography is everywhere. They're just very anti all this, so they're going to come out, and they're going to come out strong, and they're going to be huge. And a lot of these televangelists are going to get their own media empires. They're going to be all over the TV stations and even the radio broadcasts. So we're going to look back at this, and you can see even now we have current day media empire, which is going to be Joel Osteen, right? We're going to have even more during the 70s and 80s. All right, so a lot of stuff in this chapter, a lot of things going on. Definitely have three major political figures, whether they're good or bad. Lots of key events, so update your big ideas. And until next time, guys.